Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Audit Committee. A reminder that this meeting is being live streamed. I welcome in particular representatives from the Council's external auditors, Debbie Hanson, who is present in the chamber, and Janet Dawson, who is joining us remotely. Item 1 on the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies for absence from Councillor Benson.
Thank you. Item 2, are the minutes from the 11th of January agreed? Agreed. Just that one.
Sorry, Chairman, my error. You just need to ask whether any members interested.
Any members interested in the meeting this evening? Thank you. Item 4, the first of our monitoring reports this evening for Q3. Mike Deneen, will you please present this item?
Thank you very much, Chair. This item under item number 4 is the Q3 performance of the Counter Fraud and Investigation Department. It's a very similar report each quarter until the end of the year. It just running through quickly, it just identifies the work that's currently being investigated, the figures that work has generated, and also then goes on to discuss some of the activity that the team have undertaken here at Castle Point. My intention, Chair, if it's okay with yourself, is I'll quickly run through some of those figures that I've just mentioned. So at the moment, the current CFI team has 18 active investigations, and they're currently to the value of $595,000. In Q3, 2 properties were recovered by the team working with the housing department, as well as a judicial process that was followed with the assistance of the team, which also will recover a property in the next quarter. This saving for this quarter is anticipated to be about £85,000. As I explained in the paper, there is a formula that is used nationally by teams such as myself, the fraud teams. And like I say, that equates to a predicted saving of £85,000 to the authority from other expense. Some of the other activity that has taken place over Q3. We've had some fraud training awareness sessions with the Environmental Health and Housing Options team. And as a result of that, we've got a collaborative approach to the enforcement has now opened up between ourselves and those teams. The CFI manager, Rob Kleinberg, has also been chaired the monthly Counter Fraud and ASB joint working group with the housing teams and Essex Police. That goes some way to explaining then the proactive operation that is then taken place this month, whereby a number of properties, I believe it was 25 when I was writing the report, 25 properties were visited, with all of those residents being spoken to, audits of those individuals being recorded so that we know the people that are meant to be living in the houses are living in the houses. So it just adds some reassurance to that housing team that the right people are in the right homes. So that was a very good day in terms of collaborative working, and I do know we had a number of safeguarding referrals that went off via the police as well. So it isn't just housing fraud that the team are able to look into. It's also identified other offences or other concerns that we can then raise with various different departments. I haven't got anything more to bring out of the report, but I'm happy to take any questions on any of the activity that we've conducted over Q3, or any of the figures that you wish to ask me. Thanks, Chair.
So just a quick question. You mentioned that one of the types of fraud is the wrong people, presumably sort of subletting or something. Is that the only type of fraud that you discovered? I'm just curious to see what sort of thing we're up against. In
general terms, we identify either subletting, which is the obvious, but there's also issues which, although can fall under subletting, will be things like a mother or father moving out of a property and an older sibling, sort of child staying there and taking over the property, as it were. So although it all falls within the same type of fraud band, there are different circumstances that we can come across. And we also come across various different things such as unexpected successions and the ability then to remove right to buys, for instance, simply by identifying the fact that no one's actually living there that's meant to be doing it. So it is predominantly a sublet situation that we are identifying. That is the crime of that nature. But there are other things that we can come across, and as the operation showed, there are other offences that we don't necessarily deal with, but other people do pick up.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Very quickly, in terms of fraudulent activity that's happening in this situation, it's extremely hard times for a lot of people. What mitigating circumstances are taken out at the very beginning to try and resolve the issues they have and see if it is actually fraud or whether people are trying to just make ends meet?
That all falls out of the investigation in itself and is taken on its own merit. In general terms, all of our activity in terms of policy has an EQIA in the background, so it does take into account anything that we need to look into around protected categories, etc. However, such things like sublet are very much explain themselves in general terms. But where we can, if we can assist a individual to rectify a problem, and we don't believe it to be of a criminal standard, we will work with teams within the council to ensure that the situation is resolved.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Mike. We really welcome the continuing action, positive action of your team, and I hope we can carry on to see that. There are two recommendations on this report. One is that the Audit Committee notes the performance of the counter-fraud and investigation team to date. And the second the committee notes the progress of the proactive work plan for 23-24. Are these recommendations agreed? Everybody? Yes, thank you. Item number 5, Internal Audit Service, the Quality Performance Report. Rebecca Gill, the Audit Manager, here in place of Andrew Barnes. Would you like to make your report, please?
Thank you. This item is on page 14 of the PDF pack. We're working through that. This is our regular report to the committee, which just outlines the progress against delivering the 23-24 financial year's audit plan. Appendix 1, which is from page 18, provides an update on the status of each piece of work within the plan, all of which is now underway. We do keep the audit plan under review during the year, so we can respond to resource or issues that may come up in the council. We haven't made any changes since we last reported to you guys in January. Appendices 2A through to 2D give a brief update to the committee on the outcomes of the audits that have been completed since the last meeting, just to give you an overview of the findings and the actions that's being taken by officers against those. That's all I wanted to say, but happy to take any questions.
Any questions, anybody? Thank you, Rebecca. It's good to see that the satisfactory assurance for the Castle Point plan and transforming together the programme. I'm sure the council's management will move quickly to respond to the actions that are identified in the cyber incident management audit. I'm pleased to see that this has been picked up later in the action plan. Anybody have any comments? If not, is the recommendation agreed? The recommendation is that the Audit Committee notes the progress made in delivering the 23-24 internal audit strategy. Agreed. Agenda item 6, internal audit charter and strategy plan. Ms Gill, please present the report on the internal audits plans for the forthcoming year.
Okay, so this is our annual report to the committee, which is outlining our approach to delivering the internal audit service for the council and demonstrating how we comply with the public sector internal audit standards, of which we're required to comply with. I'll just run you through briefly the appendices. Appendices 1 is the audit charter, which sets out the purpose, authority and responsibility of the council's internal audit function. Appendix 2 sets out how the service will be delivered and developed in accordance with the charter. Appendix 2A sets out the audit work we plan to undertake in the next financial year, 24-25, and how this will provide assurance to the committee over the council's corporate risks is set out in Appendix 2B. Again, happy to take any questions on any of the contents.
Thank you. We note the key audit points to take place next year, just to highlight the ITC strategy and following up on the housing, fire and safety audits. Any questions, anybody? Councillor Edwards?
Can you just, on the Appendix 2B, the links to the corporate risks on there, the sort of risk assessments I do are quite different. So can you just discuss a little bit about the sort of likelihood and severity type metrics that you've got on this? Because it just seems to be a list rather than an indication of how much risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So this isn't the council's risk matrix. This is our plotting of the audits we're planning for next year against the council's risk register. So the matrix of the severity, the likelihood and the impact of those will be held separately in the council's risk register. I'm not sure if that's on the agenda tonight.
Not tonight, but it'll be coming to the committee at the next meeting.
Yeah. So what we do when we develop the audit plan is we consider the council's risk register and the risks that the council has. And when we're developing the audits, part of what we look at is, well, what does the organisation see as a risk and how can we provide assurance over those risks through the audits that we do? So that's what we're trying to do here, is just map our audit plan against your corporate risks so you can see how we're going to give you assurance over those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I think just maybe for clarity, if we can put the risk matrix in with this next time so we know what we're looking against, just might be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Thanks very much.
Anyone else? The recommendation on this one is that the Audit Committee approves the Charter Strategy and Audit Plan for 24-25. Everybody agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 7. Monitoring report of the Council's governance arrangements. Ben Brooke, would you kindly report?
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to present an update on the governance arrangements as presented in the annual governance statement, which came to the Audit Committee in July 2023, and to report on the progress against the action plan to address governance issues as also identified in the annual governance statement. This report is part of our governance arrangements, in that this monitoring report comes to Audit Committee. Ordinarily that would be twice a year, once in the autumn, once in the spring. The autumn meeting of the Audit Committee was cancelled and therefore there was no report that came to that meeting, so this will be the first one coming to the committee this evening. The governance arrangements that we have in place include individual staff leads who have responsibility for the governance processes that are set out and which basically are used to structure the report below, and are members of what we call the governance group. And this report was developed in consultation with those officers. So I'm not going to go through absolutely every single section, but I think it would be quite helpful just to pull out a few highlights for you this evening. So underneath consultation and engagement, I think I'd like to just say that much of the consultation and engagement that's taken place over 23-24 financial year has been related to the new Castle Point plan. So you can see a list of some things here. There were some community engagement workshops held, views on what people value about their area and what they'd like to see improved. There was an open spaces survey also relating to the Castle Point plan, and also getting people's views on potential sites to add to a local list of heritage assets. So I think it's just sort of mentioning that we'll be doing a lot of consultation around that particular policy document which is being developed. Underneath business planning and strategy, including partnerships, under 3.2.5, I think I just wanted to pull out some good progress that's been made over the financial year with regards to the Castle Point Regeneration Partnership, as it was called, which has now been renamed the Castle Point Place Partnership, to reframe the work that's done through that, and also to say that work has commenced to resurrect the Castle Point and Rochford Community Safety Partnership, and we did some work earlier on in the year working with Brentwood Borough Council for some initial support on that. The next area I'd just like to pick up is on 3.4.2. So this is underneath asset management. So when I was writing the report and working with one of our newly appointed assistant directors for assets, the information that he had at the time was for the planned preventative maintenance programme that we just earmarked, and work had progressed across 5 of the 10 sites that have been identified within that programme, with just over half of the allocated budget expended. Further to a meeting that he had with contractors just very recently at the beginning of this month, actually that particular programme is almost completed now, so work has been conducted on 10 of the sites and 98% of the budget has been spent. So that was quite a difference to what we had at the time when I was writing the report, so I think I just needed to update you there. Underneath health and safety, which is 3.6 and specifically 3.6.5, I think it's just worth sort of mentioning some improvements, particularly because they were mentioned as a deficiency within the annual governance statement regarding the health and safety completion rates. There's been a push on those. We've been pushing sort of managers to make sure all of their staff are absolutely up to date. These are reported at the Quarterly Business Review Board, which is a new performance review board which was put in place by the Chief Executive. And just to say that significant progress has been made on those, bringing performance up to over 90%, which is good considering that they're done on a rolling basis. So we're never going to hit 100%, but up at 90% was much better than the, I think around 70% that we were achieving when it was reported annual governance statement. So again, just wanted to report some progress there. I think that's probably all I wanted to say on the main bit of the report. I think on the action plan itself, and I think it was mentioned in an earlier report just around the cybersecurity audit. So a couple of areas on that cybersecurity audit which are sort of top priority. One of those is the rollout of multi-factor authentication, MFA as it's known, across the organisation. So that really provides us with an additional layer of security on top of what we have currently at the moment. The other element of that particular audit that came out quite strongly was just the need for us to understand the roles and responsibilities across ourselves and the council's contractors in the event of a cybersecurity attack, and being absolutely clear about that. So the audit, I think our systems are well protected and in place, but I think just in terms of some of that documentation, there is a little bit more to be done. So I just wanted to sort of draw that out, seeing as it was mentioned earlier. I think on some of the other actions, broadly there has been some progress, but I think that we haven't completed a number of actions on here. And I think that really what I wanted to say about this was that what we do now have following the appointment of the assistant directors across the organisation is an increase in capacity to be able to really sort of lead on and drive these. I think up until this point, it's kind of fallen to multiple people and therefore possibly not to anybody, and therefore there hasn't been as much progress. But if you read through the detail of the report, there has been some progress against all of these. But I think it's just to say it's quite likely that a number will roll forward into the action plan when we do the annual governance statement for the current financial year, so in other words, the one that ended 23-24. So that's all I wanted to say, but I just wanted to give a few highlights in the report. It's quite a lengthy report, but a lot in there and some things I think that we should be noting and celebrating. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Good to see a nice, open, transparent report, which will monitor the action plan closely. Any comments, anybody? Councillor?
Clarity question really. In section 343, it says that the ICT related assets are held by an external contractor. And it mentions in there that that includes servers. Are you using on-prem servers, or are you using SaaS now?
So we have most of our servers now off-site. Actually, I don't think we include it in any on-site at the moment. So they're all off-site servers, and we've been transferring sort of applications across to those servers. The last stage of that is why we need these MFA tokens in place, because we need to have those in place in order to be able to switch something else off so that we can then remove the remainder in there. You're probably asking the wrong person, although I have a responsibility for ICT. Obviously, my team know the detail a lot better than I do. But yeah, in terms of on-prem servers, that's something that we really we may have one, but we don't typically have those sort of on site anymore. They've all been migrated across to a range of servers which sit up in Manchester.
Just you mentioned about roles and responsibilities, and I appreciate this is under governance and not under project, but is there a form of a RACI document that relates around roles and responsibilities, maybe a skills matrix that kind of aligns how the staff responsibilities lay out?
in reference to all of the different governance elements here. No, we don't have such a document actually, but I think that's a good suggestion. That's something we'll look into, and we could potentially reflect that within the annual governance statement. Thank you.
The recommendation of this one is that the committee notes the assurance provided by the report and the operation of the council's governance framework as presented in the annual governance statement. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item number 8, the external audit report. Chief Exec, if you'd like to introduce the report and then hand across to Ms Hanson and Ms Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Members, this report comes to you this evening at the conclusion of a long process of investigation and review, which began back in the early months of 2022 before I took up post as Chief Executive in July of that year. It's taken a long time to get to this point, for which I apologise, but it hasn't been through any tardiness on my part. It is a reflection of the enormity and complexity of the task we've undertaken. You'll remember that this matter has been reported previously to this committee back in July of last year, and more recently to the Staff Appointments and Review Panel in February of this year, and to full council in March, where it was agreed that further work be done to investigate the potential for recovery. Members, to remind you, this is a historical set of arrangements, none of which exist now. And as you know, since I took up post, I've been working with the Cabinet to implement a transformation programme designed to modernise and improve the council and bring us into the 21st century. So this has been a whole organisation redesign, a root and branch reform of the whole workforce, a new constitution, strengthened assurance and governance frameworks for officers and for members. And this includes bolstering the terms of reference for this committee in the new municipal year and providing specialist member training for members appointed to serve on it. Internal audit colleagues have been working alongside me and the transformation programme team to review the work we've been doing, and their report has already been provided to this committee tonight. And furthermore, throughout this, I've worked directly with the council's external auditors, EY, and Debbie Hanson, who sits alongside me, and kept them informed to provide assurance that those changes are being implemented in line with good practice and good governance. And personally, I'd like to extend my thanks to Debbie and her team for the support that they have provided to me in my role and the work that I've been doing. So, members, EY's report is before the committee this evening. It provides an update as to their audit of the relevant accounting periods, which correlate with the time period when the circumstances identified in the internal audit report took place. And members, therefore, I will hand over to Debbie and to Janet, both partners at EY, for in order that they can present their report. Thank you. Through you, Chair.
Thank you, Angela. I think just by way of introduction, I'll explain why you've got two EY partners here today, which is obviously fairly unusual. So I've been the signing partner for Castlepoint Borough Council since 2017-18. But due to the issues that are referred to in this report and in the cover report which the council has provided, the risk assessment for Castlepoint's audit has increased significantly, and as a result of that, it requires an equity partner rather than a non-equity partner, which is what I am, to actually sign the opinion. So Janet will actually be taking over in terms of signing the opinion, but I will be continuing to support Janet in that work because of obviously my ongoing knowledge of this issue. So Janet is here today in that capacity, in terms of she'll be putting pen to paper when we get to the final end on this point. So having said that, I'll move on to talk about our report and obviously also reference the cover report which the council has produced, which I think is very comprehensive and detailed and an accurate representation of the picture. So as Angela has said, we obviously reported to this committee back in April 22 when I came along to the meeting and said that we'd substantially completed our audit, but that an issue had been brought to our attention at very close to that date, which we assessed would impact potentially on both the opinion on the financial statements and our value for money work. Since that time, there has been significant work undertaken by the council and ourselves to understand in more detail that issue. That's relied very heavily on the work of internal audit, who have undertaken a detailed review of that and produced a detailed report, which I understand this committee has also seen. We obviously wrote to this committee in July 23 when I also attended virtually, and at that point we had concerns about the delay and the length of time it had taken to take action on the issue. So there had been some 15 months since we were initially being made aware of the concerns by internal audit. As I said, that was obviously a concern to us, and we were also concerned that at that point the issue was still not in the public arena, and so no members of the public were aware of the concerns. Since that date, there's obviously been some significant movement in relation to that, with reports being taken to the SARC committee and council, and obviously decisions taken at both of those meetings regarding further action to be taken in relation to the potentially unlawful payments. Alongside that, the transformation agenda has been progressing, as Angela has outlined, and therefore we feel much more comfortable now that the council has taken full ownership of this issue and action is moving forwards. We did give consideration to whether we should issue what we call a public interest report, which is quite a significant report to issue, following the fact that the council has actually taken the action that we have referred to and the issue is now in the public domain. We are satisfied at the moment we do not need to do that, and therefore we're not proposing to issue such a report. So if I then move on from that sort of general background to the actual content of the report itself. So we include that background on pages sort of 12 to 13 of the report, which I've literally just gone through. Then we move on to talk about the position and the impact on the 2021 audit and also the subsequent years. So in relation to 2021, we are proposing to issue a disclaimer on the council's accounts. That's because of the fact we are concerned regarding that we can't get sufficient evidence because of the pervasive nature of the concerns we have about the bypass of controls, but also the intention of the bypass controls and whether we can place reliance on the representations we had from management at that time and senior management integrity at that time as well. Therefore, that gives us concerns about the completeness, accuracy and reliability of the information we can obtain to undertake our audit, and that means that we have concluded we're not in a position to be able to issue an opinion, so we'd be issuing a disclaimer on those financial statements. A disclaimer is quite an unusual position, and therefore I think it will be very important that there's management of that process in terms of communicating what that means for the council. Alongside that, we have to consider our value for money assessment, which we also undertake alongside our opinion on the financial statements. And in relation to that, we've concluded that there are significant weaknesses in governance arrangements during 2021, which enabled these potentially unlawful payments to be made and not detected. Therefore, we'd also be modifying our opinion in relation to significant weaknesses in governance arrangements. And our report sets out the specific criteria that we'd be referring to in relation to those weaknesses. In relation to the future years, the similar arrangements would be in place for 21-22 and 22-23. So again, we would be issuing a disclaimed opinion and a qualified opinion in relation to significant weaknesses in value for money. And that's because those concerns continue through that period with, again, potentially unlawful payments during all of those years. In relation to 23-24, we are still in the process of considering the position in relation to that. A number of the key officers who received payments and authorised unlawful payments were still in post during that period, not for the whole period, and they also had maybe reduced roles. Therefore, we need to assess whether it's going to be possible for us to receive sufficient information to give us the assurance that we need to be able to issue an opinion on the 23-24 accounts. So we'll be working with officers over the coming months to have those discussions, to determine what additional work might be required to be able to provide us with that assurance to enable us to move to an opinion. It may be that we didn't get to a full clean opinion, but if we could move from a disclaimer, that would clearly be helpful for the council. So we'll continue to work with officers to achieve that as much as we can. In terms of our planned reporting deadlines, we'd be looking to come to your June committee with our proposed audit results report and value for money reporting. And then we'd be coming to a subsequent committee, which I would assume would be probably around September time, with the reporting on 21-22 and 22-23. I realise this is probably quite an unusual report for the committee to receive, and I'm sure that members of the committee have got some questions, and I don't know if Janet's got anything to add to anything that I've said before we hand over for questions.
Thanks, Debbie. Nothing more from me, but happy to answer any questions that come our way.
Ladies, for your reports. They're very comprehensive and give us a full picture following the consideration by this committee last year. the staff appointments and the review committee in February and the ordinary council meeting last month. We're grateful for the support provided by our external auditors and look forward to receiving the reports in the new municipal year to conclude the accounts. Unless anyone has any questions, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, thank you, Chair. I do have some serious concerns and things I'm uncomfortable with as a councillor. I have made notes, but unfortunately I came straight from work. With your permission, may I work from my notes to answer those,
Yes,
and I'll
sir.
try to be as succinct as I possibly can in terms of that. In connection with Section 8, Item 5.6, bearing in mind a six-figure sum has been mentioned along with the amount of time the word unlawful is mentioned, I feel there's 5 key justifications why a public interest report is required, if not essential. Putting aside the amount of effort and resources that will be required, this issue should be fundamental to the transformation of the council, as mentioned by Angela earlier, for the following reason. One thing you mentioned earlier, Chair, was transparency and accountability. The current administration make a big point about transparency. Issuing a PIR will enhance transparency and accountability within the council's transformation programme. It provides stakeholders, including residents and taxpayers, and regulatory bodies with the comprehensive understanding of the issues identified during the audit process and the actions taken to address them. Secondly, the public confidence. A PIR will demonstrate the commitment of the council to address any significant concerns or irregularities that may impact public trust. By openly acknowledging and addressing issues, it will help rebuild confidence in the integrity and the effectiveness of governance and financial management process. Third, preventive measures. Publishing a PIR can serve as a valuable tool to us and other such entities to learn from past mistakes and implement preventive measures. It can be highly systemic weaknesses and vulnerabilities that existed within the governance framework, prompting proactive actions to mitigate future risks, as well as being seen that we are embedding practices into the change programme that will mitigate future risks. Fourth, regulatory compliance. Now, whilst Ernst Young may have determined not to issue a PIR based on their assessment, it's essential to ensure compliance with statutory duties under the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014. If there are compelling reasons to believe that these issues identified warrant further scrutiny or public disclosure, which I think we all agree they do, it may be necessary to challenge their decision and advocate for the issuance of a PIR to fulfil, if not legal obligations, definitely our commitment to the Constitution, which I might add we're already in breach of, only having 2 audits last year rather than 4. Long-term impact is the 5th and final one. The consequences of significant, potentially unlawful financial irregulations or governance failures can have long-term implications for the council and its stakeholders. Issuing a PIR can contribute to more thorough understanding of the root causes and potential remedies, thereby helping to prevent similar issues from recurring in the future. Overall, Chairman, the argument for issuing a PIR centres on the principles of transparency, accountability, and safeguarding the interests of the public. It underscores the importance of addressing significant issues identified during the audit process and promoting trust and confidence in the local government's operation. In my opinion, it should be part of the transformation programme and should be subject to an RCA or root cause analysis, as well as inclusion in the CIA RAID and RACI documentation. Mr. Chairman, I've read the report thoroughly, and in conjunction with other reports previously before this committee, it's very worrying reading from my perspective. The report highlights that in February, a report came before us highlighting a quote, the unlawful approval of payments by former officers, and I ask members to turn their attention to the bullet points listed on the first page of the internal audit report. There where it says inappropriate authorisation of payments made by officers, deliberate attempts to conceal the actions being taken in some cases. As the reports contain confirmed illegality and attempts to conceal action taken from elected members of the public, and the public should I say, I cannot see how the auditors are not mindful to undertake a public interest report at this time, as the public have the right to know in their taxpayer money is being spent illegally, and if the democratic processes they rely on are being undermined. I would like to formally, therefore, move that we as a committee or the council, through the appropriate processes, write back to the auditors requesting that they produce the public interest report on that basis. And I would welcome a seconder for that motion from any member of the committee if they wish to do so. Furthermore, and I will bring this very quickly to a point, Chairman, I would like to ask about our own processes as a council for dealing with this matter. Members of the public have asked me why there appears to be no public record at all of a meeting of the staffing and review panel that took place in the summer of 22 that contained business relevant to these accounts. Now, I know some matters have to be handled as a private session, and quite rightly so, and I do not wish to go into detail of any of those. However, I also know that there needs to be some public record of every council committee meeting that opens in public, and indeed, if one opens in private, there needs to be public reasons given. I do not believe that there is anything available that I can find publicly on any site. I raise this here, Chairman, as the public need full confidence that the matter is being handled properly by the council, and I believe questions over publicly available information about any relevant council committee meeting could undermine the confidence. So can I get some clarity, therefore, on what public records are available on the meeting and get confirmation from relevant officers that all relevant public notices and records regarding the meeting were published correctly? Thank you, Chair.
Chairman, for the record, Councillor Thornton is correct when he says that we must not stray into matters which are private and confidential. However, I can give assurance to this committee that following a decision of the lower tier tribunal of the Information Commissioner's Office, all processes undertaken by this council are entirely valid. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Well, I think I've just got a question for my colleague before we proceed, which wasn't my original question. So can I come back on a second question afterwards? Thank you. Just before we discuss this across the committee, I'd just like to understand what it is that will be revealed in the notice you propose that's not already been published in the internal audit report and addressed in the transformation programme, because I'm struggling to understand where we're at variance with our auditors on the progress that's been made.
Thank you, I appreciate that. My concern when reading this was that although we have given a certain amount of information to the public about the fact an event took place, that there is no specific detail around that, and I appreciate there are privacy reasons why we can't give specific information. The disclaimer worried me because it feels like, from my opinion, we're sweeping it under the carpet. You may look at it from the perspective of we're starting to draw a line and we're carrying on from that point. What I want to make sure through this process is that the lessons that have been learnt are actually within the governance of the new transformation process, and that we are seen by the public doing the right thing in this situation. And at this point in time, I'm not convinced that we are.
Before you carry on, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Thornton asked if he had a seconder for his report. Is there anyone going to second him?
Chair, would it be helpful if we just gave a little bit of commentary to explain a little bit more the reason for the position we're currently in, which is where at the moment we are not minded to issue a public interest report, but that does not mean that that's definitely a one, that couldn't change. So I think Janet may want to comment on that, but I think also it might be worth clarifying that this is purely an update report. This is not our final formal reporting. So you will receive an audit results report, which will explain the basis of the disclaimer. You will also receive our auditor's annual report, which will include our value for money assessment, and that will include full commentary on the governance arrangements, on what we think the failings in arrangements in 2021 were that led to basically the potentially unlawful payments. In addition to that, the Council has also agreed to update the annual governance statement to include reference to those weaknesses, as well as including reference in the financial statements to the areas where there are potentially unlawful payments. So I think there will be a lot more information in the public arena once that process is concluded. This is purely an interim update report because we were conscious we hadn't brought anything back to this committee, and therefore we wanted to give you an indication of where we were at the current time and what the plans were for the completion of the audits. So I don't know if Janet wants to say any more about public interest report, but this clearly isn't our final report, and I think it's really important that you understand that there'll be a lot more that we will report. So even though it's not labelled as a public interest report, the same content and information will be included in the public arena.
Briefly.
I think just to add to Debbie's comment, if I may, all of those points that the councillor has made about the information that is would be valuable to have about how the council has transformed its arrangements, how the governance arrangements have then been addressed to ensure that this doesn't happen again, how the transformation programme has moved through the organisation to make sure roles and responsibilities are clear and that the controls are in place. Clearly, all of that is subject to our review as external auditors, as well as we move towards 23-24 reporting. So Debbie's point about we haven't yet put our full report for 2021 and the subsequent years in front of this committee, and then clearly we will be looking at all of those aspects to ensure that we're satisfied that those arrangements have been put in place through 23-24 as the transformation programme has been taking effect. And then obviously, and you're clearly very aware from the questions that you're asking, you've obviously got a background in this area, but you'll be aware of the lines of defence within the organisation on which the audit committee can also seek assurance. And so I think, to Debbie's point, we are not minded at this point to do a report in the public interest. Your points are all valid as to information that needs to be looked at, needs to be shared, and needs to be tested for assurance purposes. But I think at this point in time, we are satisfied that the organisation is doing all it can to do that, and we will be continuing to look at that and assess it and report it. And so we are not fettering our discretion as to whether or not we do then do a report in the public interest, but it is our responsibility to make that decision. But very useful points. Thank you very much in terms of what needs to be considered in making that assessment.
Thank you, Chair. So let's come back. First of all, thank you very much for saying that, and I appreciate it, and I do understand that. I think there's two things I'd like to add. One, I'm quite passionate about this, as you probably get, about this, because this effectively happened on my watch in the sense that I was in that previous administration, may not have been aware of what was going on, but it certainly happened there, and accusations will fly that I did. And I wanted it to be well known that I was not involved in this, and that I would like to get down to the root cause analysis of why it happened and how we ended up where we ended up from that perspective. So that's the key thing. I appreciate what you're saying. This was my only opportunity to voice my opinions, and I had to take it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards, you had a question.
I would say it's a relatively minor point compared to the request. Andrew, I hope you'll appreciate that given what we've just heard. I won't be seconding the motion. But in the document that we have here, the report, it mentions the delays in the council dealing with this matter. My perception is that there were no delays, that we followed the processes correctly and as fast as we legally could. So I don't know if we can perhaps moderate the language there somewhat, because I think it mischaracterises the courage it took to challenge internal processes and the amount of work that's gone in on the team in bringing this out into the public domain and resolving the issues.
Councillor Thornton, can I ask that after you've heard the reports from Ms Dawson and Ms Hanson, that do you want to withdraw your request for the motion?
No. I don't see why it precludes the committee asking for one now. If it's something that comes up later on, then great. But I still see that there is a public interest in knowing that information.
It hasn't been seconded.
We haven't had a seconder. Do we have one?
Then it falls.
Thank you.
Chair, would you like me to respond on the comment regarding the delays?
Yes, if you would, thank you.
So I think I would stand by the comment that I think 15 months was probably too long for the council to deal with the issues and get to the position that we've now got to. So at the point the issue was brought to our attention, it was brought to our attention by internal audit, and I think it's quite important we recognise that the council itself sort of identified some concerns, and internal audit did a piece of work and brought that to our attention on a timely basis. As I said, that was in April 2022. For that then to take 15 months, when at that point the internal audit work I think was substantially completed, in our view was too long. We do recognise it's very important that the council follows due process, particularly in issues that's so sensitive as this, where they're involving individuals and potentially unlawful payments. However, we still think that that could have been progressed more quickly, and we stand by that comment. But however, the key thing I think now is that the council has progressed through the transformation programme. They are now in a much better position. As Janice has said, we'll be assessing those current arrangements as part of our more updated value for money work, which we'll be commencing as soon as we can. But I still think that that's a very long period for such an issue to continue to hang over the council in effect. And I think part of our concern about the delay was it was preventing the council moving forward. And obviously from if you were a resident of Castle Point, you still haven't had an audited set of 2021 financial statements. Members of the public didn't know why they hadn't had a set of audited financial statements. So I think that thing about transparency, coming back to the previous member's point, I think it was very important to have dealt with that as quickly as possible, and I think it could potentially have been done more quickly. I do, however, recognise that during that period, there were, I think, 2 interim chief execs before Angela came in, so I think there was a lot of issues that had to be dealt with, and obviously this involved very senior officers within the council, which also put a strain in terms of the organisation. So we do recognise all of that context, but I think would still stand by our comments.
It's fair, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, any comments? In that case, I'm going to move the recommendation to note the contents of this report. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Edwards, thank you. Is this agreed that we... Those in favour of the recommendation? Thank you. As there being no other business, end of the meeting, and thank you for your attendance.